All right. Is this a good distance from the mic? Okay, so it's 2 o'clock. We're going to get started. I don't want to run over for the next speaker. This is my first talk at a conference like this, so I'm very excited to be here. And this is the Human Interface Device Attack Vector Research and Development. I'm Alex Siegel. I came out here from California. I know some people out in Texas who want Donald Trump to build a wall this way, so I thought that was kind of funny. I just graduated with a bachelor's in computer science. I'm looking for work. This is my Twitter handle, my email address, my PGP key. I did undergraduate research under Mohammed Hussein at Cal Poly Pomona. It's a pretty good school. I really like it, and he's definitely the best part about it. The way I got into information security, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my degree. Initially, I thought I was going to go to law school after, be a technological intellectual property lawyer. But Raytheon did a really, really good talk at my school with some live Metasploit demos, and I was hooked right away. So I went to Black Hat in 2013, and I took Dave Kennedy's Secret Pen Testing Techniques class, and it was a really great experience. We got to see some really cool stuff. The binary 2 teensy was great. We did the Java applet attack and things like that. PowerShell injection is currently my favorite technique, but actually my favorite part of the class was that PowerShell injection wasn't working. He said it worked a week before the class, and then Microsoft did something that broke it through 9 errors, and he just took it as like a personal offense, and he fixed 7 out of 9 bugs over lunchtime, just typing away furiously, tabbing through screens left and right. And I just thought that was so amazing. So this is a quote from Michael Weston of Burn Notice. It says, show someone what they can't have and they'll just resent you. Give it to them too easy and they won't appreciate it. The key is giving them just enough of a taste that all they want is more. So that's a key concept in social engineering, and also, I had that taste and I was really hooked. So one of the things I thought was the coolest that he mentioned was the Programmable Human Interface Device Universal Serial Bus Keyboard Dongle. Adrian calls it FUCT for short. He did a really great talk on it, and it uses a teensy Arduino board to emulate a mouse or keyboard, a human interface device. You gain arbitrary code execution on the system, so you can use that for binary 2 teensy, PowerShell injection. You can write CryptoLocker variants. Basically whatever you want will run on the system as though the user's typing these commands themselves. So some people like to do more noisy things, some people like to do more silent stuff, and I'm a big fan of silent intelligence gathering. I have a friend who was a big fan of the SR-71 for a long, long time, went to work for Northrop, and he was like, if you think about it, the SR-71 is, it's just a big flying camera. I was like, well, the U-2, it spotted the nuclear missiles going up in Cuba before they were operational, and there's no sort of, attack after the fact, after they're set up, that can outweigh that intelligence gathering in advance. So right now you hear a lot of talks about people maintaining persistence in networks for years, and knowing what your enemy is going to do before they do it consistently, I think is the best possible outcome of this attack. So why, some say, use a human interface device? There are a lot of different ways to get in. I do it because I just think it's the coolest. Abraham Maslow is a psychologist who's come up with a lot of cool stuff, and he has this concept of self-actualization, that everyone has their own innate inner talent, and fulfilling that goal is the ultimate way to achieve happiness as a human being. So Dave Kennedy says sometimes in a pen test you only get one shot. So if you're trying to establish a foothold and you do like a bad phishing email with broken English or something like that, a lot of times that will put people on alert and it's harder to get in. And so one of the things he mentioned at this talk is that they sent out 3 keyboards and they got 9 shells back because they bought the fanciest keyboards they could find, put teensies in them, sent them out, and not only did the IT department staff who they sent them to plug them in thinking they'd won a survey they'd never entered in, but other people would take these keyboards and plug them into their own computers just because, flashing lights are cool. And so they got more shells back than keyboards they sent out. So normally a 300% success rate's pretty good. This guy had a 300% fail rate. He's a doctor who managed to kill 3 people during an amputation. So the main reason you'd use any sort of social engineering attack is humans. Chris and Dave say that humans are the eighth layer of the OSI model, and they're the most vulnerable. And you'll see consistently that systems are getting hardened, but people are generally remaining the same. So these are two kind of chemical facts that I think are really interesting, because it's important to remember that humans, no matter how smart or educated you are, you still have, the same chemicals in your brain as everyone else. So Dave is a huge fan of hugs, and hugs that last over 20 seconds, it will release oxytocin in your brain, which some people call the cuddle chemical, and you'll naturally trust this person more and feel, closer to them. And then this is something I think is really interesting, which is actually the molecular structure of tears are different based on why you're crying. So there are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true, and the other is to refuse to accept what is true. And so I think in a lot of social engineering attacks in the ivory tower of the academic lab, a lot of people will say default deny. But one of the stories that I found really interesting is there was a girl who's working the front desk at a hotel, second year in college, HRT, just trying to get some experience and a paycheck. And this guy comes in and he says, "I'm the regional sales manager for the hotel. You need to get your manager, and I want to speak with him." And the hotel had a policy that one person always had to be at the front desk to answer the phone, and obviously in our situation to monitor the computer. And so she said, "No, I can't do that. I have to stay here." And he was like, "If you don't get your manager right now, I'm going to get you fired." And she was like, "Sorry, I can't." And he basically went to the president of the hotel chain and was like, "If you don't fire this, pay by the hour employee, I'm going to quit." And he was one of those people who the keynote speaker was talking about, who was really valuable because of his connections. And so they stood to lose potentially millions of dollars in conference contracts and possibly even like a celebrity boycott out in LA, which would be horrible. So she got fired. So that's one of those situations where doing the right thing, following company policy, and not just believing what she was told didn't work out for her. So a lot of times as pen testers, hackers, social engineers, we don't see the scenario where not believing what we're saying works out very poorly. If it had been a pen test or something like that, she probably still would have kept her job, and it wouldn't have hurt her as much as not listening to this guy who actually was the regional sales manager. This is it's a quote from Patrick Rothfuss, who wrote the Kingkiller Chronicles, and they're a great set of books. And he said, "Too much truth confuses the facts. Too much honesty makes you sound insincere." That's something I really believe. If you tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth all the time, people are less likely to believe you than if you couch the truth, tell half-truths that are a lie. Mark Twain says it's easier to fool people than convince them they have been fooled. There are plenty of people who will plug a backdoored mouse or keyboard into their computer no problem, who won't believe that mice and keyboard are backdoorable. I've actually gotten to arguments with people who are graduating with computer science degrees who will tell me, and I'm sure they'll tell all of you, Microsoft Office file formats are always safe to open. Henry's rule is that anyone is willing to give you something for whatever it is they're hungry for. So in order to get someone to accept this mouse or keyboard, a lot of times you're trying to figure out, what makes them tick and how you can get them to accept this device. And so Abraham Maslow, the psychiatrist I quoted earlier, he has this pyramid of needs. And so the bottom four he calls deficiency needs, and the top one is the concept of self-actualization I mentioned earlier, where kind of doing your life's purpose is what gives you ultimate fulfillment. And so if you can find any one of these needs that's not being met by an employee, it's a lot easier to manipulate them. There are a lot of companies who barely meet the bottom two needs, and almost no company has any sort of emphasis on helping their employees achieve self-actualization. So it's my opinion that most people, they really don't care that much about what happens to their company. This is a little bit more elaborated hierarchy of needs, but I also thought it was really funny because, yeah, they added Wi-Fi to the bottom as like a basic human need now. And of course, when I move into a new apartment, I don't always run a wireless network, but the first thing I set up is the router, keyboard, and then I spend a few hours just not doing anything else and relaxing from putting all my stuff inside. And so, there are increasingly companies that will offer Wi-Fi in the lobby and things like that. And, if you don't let them access your wireless network, they'll act like, you denied a starving man food. So this is a tweet by someone where they said they asked a Target employee if they could open a camera before they buy it. And he said he wouldn't care if they killed someone in front of them. And I think that's really standard for a lot of companies. There are several, people I know who work at defense contractors and things like that. And their stance is, I'm here, I'm doing my job, it's a corporate environment, I don't really like it. And they could care less if I got hit by a bus. So this, I think, is a good example. I don't know if you guys know the whammy game. There was this guy who figured out the pattern, and he basically won, I think, something like $124,000 or something like that in a time when the average winnings was like $14,000. But I think it's really interesting that they noted that the show's contestant supervisor, the one who normally selects which contestants go on and which don't, he didn't get a good feeling from this guy, so he didn't want to put him on the show. And his boss overruled him. So it's important to kind of trust your instincts. Chris Hadnagy says a lot of times when you feel that disquisite about someone you can't really put your finger on, it's because what they're saying doesn't match their body language. And then also, this guy, in the future, he'll probably be more likely to just put someone on the show so he doesn't get overruled by his boss again. That can be embarrassing. This guy is someone who's not in the security industry, and he's a true, scam artist. But I think he ran one of the most interesting social engineering scams, if you want to call it that. He started a self-defense school and said he was an ex-Navy SEAL. He had discharge papers that listed among the awards 2 Medal of Honors, which hasn't happened since World War I. And it's pretty easy to verify that it hasn't. But this lady, Carol Roberts, who was a Navy vet, didn't even think to verify that. She quit her job. 2 doctors gave him $850,000 to start a private military contracting company with him. And nobody was suspicious until he said that he had a contract guarding a construction site in Burundi, and they traveled out there, and then he started acting like he'd never been in a war zone before. So does anyone want to give me $1 million and come to South Sudan with me? I think that would probably be the worst situation to realize you've had a scam run on you, is when you're in actual real physical danger in one of the worst places in the world. And a simple Wikipedia search would have saved them from doing that. But people, they don't verify. They trust, they don't verify. So Kevin Mitnick says all anyone needs to do is set up a website selling a product at 20% of market price, and people are going to be tricked into providing their credit card numbers. So that is kind of the lowest hanging of fruit, and I recommend using the HID attack vector on a little bit higher hanging fruit. This is something I thought that was really interesting, in that the government put out a bunch of security videos. They used Mitnick in the video, and they covered his eyes, and they didn't alter his voice at all. So it's instantly recognizable who it is. So anyone who wants to use a computer, they need some way to interface with the computer. A mouse, a keyboard, a joystick, whatever. This is kind of funny in that it doesn't find the keyboard, and it tells you to press keys, to continue. So anyone who doesn't have a working keyboard, or if it's broken, or even if you add one with more flashing lights, 90% of the time they're going to plug it in. One thing about social engineering and target profiling, so this says, once Bruce Schneider was kidnapped and taken out of the country, his kidnappers got picked up and charged with a violation of U.S. cryptography export laws. And these are 2 tweets by Chris Nickerson, who was on the panel. Recently, people have been trying to run scams on him, and he steals their TeamViewer session ID and password. So if you're running a social engineering attack, try and make sure you know who you're social engineering. Don't try it on Chris Nickerson or Kevin Mitnick. People try and run the Microsoft scam on Kevin Mitnick all the time. And if you're doing something like this and you're like, oh, I'm going to run a prank, and then it turns out the kid is like the son of an FBI agent, you get a full investigation, it's not good. So you really want to know what you're doing. And this one I kind of have there because there's no accounting for acts of God. This is a security camera picture where a bird just happens to be right in front of the license plate. Uh, so I went and I replicated the Teensy attack that Adrian had done previously. And I was super proud. I did this over the summer between Black Hat and school. And I took it into my professor's office. I was like, all right, this can be my research project. And what he said was, replication does not count as research. I didn't do anything new. I had to do something new. But at the time, Bluetooth and mobile attacks were really all the rage. And so he asked, can I convert this attack to Bluetooth? So initially what I wanted to do is I wanted to basically take a BeagleBone Black and an Ubertooth 1, put a power source in like a shoebox and walk around and break into every Bluetooth connection I could find, inject binary to Teensy or PowerShell injection, or log their keystrokes, and just, you know, walk by the offices and own everyone. That doesn't work out. Bluetooth uses something called secure simple pairing, which means that the traffic is encrypted, and unless you observe the pairing process, it's almost impossible to break into an existing connection. It's as feasible as brute forcing any other type of AES encryption. So then we moved back into supplying our own Trojan human interface device. And what we found essentially is if we took a Bluetooth keyboard and we just put a Teensy in it, you couldn't interact with the pre-existing Bluetooth transmitter in the keyboard. So we could either take a PS2 keyboard and rip everything out and embed our own transmitter in our own Teensy and transmit the keystrokes through that, or we could write a driver for a Bluetooth keyboard to use its existing adapter. So the hardware route turned out to be a little easier, and our first attempt, we kind of drew it out like this to see if it would work. We found out that with Bluetooth, you could pair as either a mouse or a keyboard. You didn't pair as a straight HID device. So if you put it in a mouse, you couldn't inject keystrokes. So we basically had to do it with a keyboard. So we took an Arduino Leopard and a Bluetooth transmitter, and we put them together. And you can solder all of this in a keyboard. There are a lot of keyboards now that they sell that have two separate hubs. And so we injected keystrokes, and you can do binary to Teensy or PowerShell injection through this. I thought this was really interesting though, because my dad wrote this message when he helped me with a lot of the soldering work and things like that. And 65, just retired, and he wrote, "Hello, this is the best thing I've done so far." So after, you know, over 40 years in the industry, he thought this kind of attack was the coolest thing he'd ever done, and I thought that was really cool. So that's part of why I'm hoping, you know, to make it my life's work so I can always think I'm doing something cool instead of just kind of feeling like, oh, I wrote Outlook plugins my whole life, but I got paid, whatever. That's what he did for a long time. So Route 1 was a success, and one of the things that I thought was really cool is right now you see network traffic analysis increasing a lot, and so those keyboards with two hubs, you can actually solder in the Teensy and the Arduino and the Bluetooth transmitter, but they also make little hardware level keyloggers that will intercept the electrical signals, and then you can you can solder in a SD card also. And so you could have the Bluetooth keyboard operate totally normally with no sort of, you know, software running on their system, no network traffic analysis, and as long as you can retrieve the SD card at some point from the keyboard, I think the ideal way to do this would be something like send them a recall notice for the keyboard and hope they just send it back to you. Then they'll be none the wiser. So I really wanted to do it with the Windows driver framework. I think the hardware stuff is really cool, but I love pure software. The Windows kernel mode driver framework, obviously it's really powerful to have ring 0 direct memory access. The pure software development means that there's no trace physical evidence. So here, you know, if they do break the keyboard or open it up for any reason, obviously they'll see that there's a bunch of stuff inside it. A lot of people won't know that it's not supposed to be there, but some people will. And also, in our case, you know, we have to solder it on each time. And for the mouse, we went through 3 mice before we completed that one. And I think in the future we'll be able to possibly do it one by one without any errors, but it still takes a lot more time than if you have a working device driver and you can just flash it on, you know, like 10 keyboards in an hour or something like that and send them all out. Kevin Mitnick did something like this. There's a shout out to the Social Engineering Toolkit, which I like, but he also talks about he bought an HP printer, he made a printer driver, put it on a CD with the HP logo on it, went to a company, said, hey, I'm with the HP Early Adopter Program, gave them the printer, gave them the driver, told them how important it was to install the driver because of debugging purposes, and of course, they put the printer right on their network, they installed the Trojan driver, and he was in. The Windows driver framework is separated into the user mode driver framework and the kernel mode driver framework. Object drivers run individual devices, while filter drivers will interact with all devices at that type, and they reside on the system. So ideally, you want to put a kernel mode filter driver on their system, and then even if they switch keyboards later on, as long as that driver still resides on their system, you'll have access or whatever it is you design the driver to do. The Windows driver framework is built on top of the Windows driver model, which is more complicated and devalued, but it still exists completely. And with the Windows driver model, you can do things like direct power management and things like that. So if you wanted to try and fry their computer, like some people have made bad USBs that do that, you'd need to use the Windows driver model. So I'm hoping to get better at the Windows driver framework and then also learn the older Windows driver model, which a lot of people now just completely ignore because of the framework on top of it. So this is the Windows architecture, and I don't know if you see, but it's separated into user mode and kernel mode. And this is a big distinction. User mode drivers are a lot less powerful. There's a lot of things you can only access in the kernel space. If you guys haven't seen Zero Steiner's talks, I definitely recommend checking them out. So this is an overview of the user mode driver framework. And basically just what I want you to note is that everything up here is done in the user mode, and then there's some calls down below. And then if you look at the kernel system drivers, there's the application and the Windows API in the user mode. And then all that's exposed to the user mode is that Windows API. They have no sort of insight into the actual functionality of the driver. So Jason Sietz, who wrote the Gray Hat Python and Black Hat Python books, in those books he notes specifically the importance of using an appropriately privileged debugger. So if you're running antivirus software in like a user mode or something like that, it is completely incapable of detecting what's going on in the kernel space. An unverified direct memory access driver you could actually use to just overwrite parts of the kernel, and they would be none the wiser. So this is Corey Hagen. He went to my school. He works at Sony now. He's a game developer, and he's the one who really taught me about interrupts and how they work. So I wanted to give him a little shout out here. But the interrupt request protocol, interrupts are a fundamental concept in computer science, and they're extremely important in task management and scheduling. The interrupt request level is basically how it gives priority to interrupts. Narganapathy, who was the architect of Windows I.O. for a long time, in the evolution of Windows I.O., he talks about how prior to Vista, there was only one level of interrupt. They were all kernel system interrupts, and that's why if a regular process froze, a lot of times you'd have to totally restart the computer. So keystrokes and mouse clicks, they issue interrupts. I believe they have an IRQL level of 1, and it goes, I believe, from 0 to 7. So I found this a little while ago, a small kernel rootkit called Phoenix Kit, which lives in the IRP layer, and it notes those interrupts that are sent by the keyboard before they reach the actual program, and so it will do keylogging there. It generates a .sys and a .reg, and if you can get those on the system, you'll have full access to do whatever you want. The source code for this rootkit, I highly recommend you take a look at it if you're interested in this type of stuff. It's absolutely beautiful, and I showed it to several people in the graduate level security class who have experience with C and C++, and they were like, it looks good, but I just don't have enough experience with the Win32 native APIs to really tell you what it does. So anyone who can, part by part tell me exactly what this kit is doing, I'll love you forever. But this is where it lives. So there's the device object, there's the driver object, there's the original interrupt request protocol handler, and the rootkit code just kind of resides in there, and everything that's supposed to be routed to the IRP handler is routed through the rootkit, and it uses some code from Clandestiny's klog rootkit to log all of those on the system. And it has some very cool obfuscation techniques as well. So one of the reasons we can write our own drivers is the way the driver model works. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with like interfaces and how overrides work in computer science, but basically there's a generic driver which establishes the function calls and things like that, and there's set functionality there. So any mouse or keyboard that you plug in, it will start, and any USB device indeed will it'll start working with that basic driver, and then there can be a specific driver which can be written by Microsoft or an independent hardware vendor, and that driver will also be installed on the systems. And most of the time what you're doing is you're overriding the functions of the generic driver, and so here you can just add a little extra. Installing drivers on systems when you plug something in is very standard. It happened when I plugged my USB in device here to put this talk on this computer. It happens when you put in external adapters. It happens when you set up the Arduino environment. It happens when you plug in a new mouse. And one of the things I really love about Razer is they started doing this thing where you plug it in and you get this pop-up, and if you clicked install, it would retrieve software from the web, it would install it, and then it would ask you to enter your credentials. So we might be seeing users conditioned to expect when a mouse or keyboard is plugged into their computer to retrieve and install something from the internet and then enter credentials in there. And obviously for this attack, that would be golden. There are steps being taken to prevent these types of attacks. Driver signing has been tightened down a lot in Windows 10, and they're doing like a centralized signing type thing. This is bad for this attack, but it's also bad for a lot of users. This is an external adapter. It no longer works with Windows 10. This is, I was trying to upgrade a computer to Windows 10 and it was absolutely incompatible with all previous drivers. I have a friend who successfully upgraded to Windows 10 with a Toshiba laptop, but the built-in keyboard, it no longer recognizes that driver, so he can't type on it anymore. Obviously that's very counterproductive for him, and he would rather have his keystrokes logged because he's not really doing anything that important than not be able to use his computer anymore. So sometimes, you know, security restrictions, they have downsides. But Route 2 is still a work in progress. I'm working on creating that direct memory access driver to do these types of things. And this was just recently a firmware overwrite thing that Fire discovered on Cisco routers. And what was really notable here for me is that you weren't supposed to be able to overwrite the firmware on these routers, but there were certain flags that you could overwrite, and once you overwrote those flags, you could then overwrite the firmware. So this is one of the great stories where Spock gives JFK a cab ride and takes like a genuine interest in him, and it's a really great story. You should read it if you get the opportunity. But he said, lots of competition in your business just like in mine, and then he gave me this: just remember there's always room for one more good one. Words to live by, and I did. So I'm hoping to get better at this, be good at this, and I'm hoping there's a place for me in this field. So thank you.